Hello, welcome. We are in chapter 1 of FST, and in this video we're going to continue lesson 1.4. If you haven't watched the first part of this lesson, make sure you do that first so that you understand quartiles and percentiles. We've been talking about some quartiles in order to get to the point where we're creating a box plot. So in this part of this lesson, we'll actually get to the point of creating a box plot. We're going to pick up at example number 2. And we're going to go back to this example where we were looking at test scores for 35 students. We already talked about the percentiles, but we're going to go back and find the quartiles. Now, if you remember from our first part, we did this by hand. So we went through and we found our median and then we crossed off high-low. However, we could also use our graphing calculators to help us find these values. And the helpful thing with this is, especially when we have a lot of values, it could help speed up the process of finding these quartiles. This is going to be our procedure that we use on our calculator. Now, the first thing that we have to do is we have to enter our data into our calculator. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my graphing calculator. And we're doing statistics, right? This whole chapter is on statistics. So we're going to be going to the stat button. So I'm going to go ahead and press this. And to enter our data, we do need to edit our data. So I'm going to go to edit, and then we have a list here where we can input our data. Now, since this is all one set of data, we're just going to put it in one list. It's given to you in 5 different columns, but we're going to put it all in one list since it's all just one set of data. So I'm going to go ahead and enter all 35 values into my graphing calculator. I know it takes a little bit of time, but it will be helpful in the long run. I think it will save you time if you can get these entered. Now, one thing to just double check after you're done entering your data, we know there should be 35 values. So it should say 35 when you're on that last value. This shows that it's the 35th value, and this is the 34th value. So make sure it says 35. If it doesn't say 35, if it says 34, maybe you forgot one, or if it says 36, you might have added in an extra one. Now, our calculator will actually calculate our quartiles for us. So we're going to go ahead and do this calculation. I'm going to go back to my stat button, and now we're going to do a calculation. So I'm going to go over to calculate. And we're going to choose this very first option, which says 1 var stats. The var stands for variable. So this is one variable. This data just represented one variable. It just represented test scores. So we're not looking at more than one. So we're going to press enter. It's just confirming that we put that data in list 1, so we can just go down and press calculate. Now, it's going to give us a handful of different things here. Most of this stuff we're just going to kind of ignore for the time being. However, there's a few things that we should already know. We did learn back in lesson 1.3 that this x bar is the mean. The x bar is the mean. So this actually gives us the mean or the average of our data set. So instead of adding all of these numbers and dividing by 35, we could just type this in to our calculator and do the 1 var stats to get the mean. We're going to ignore the next 4 numbers. This n tells us how many numbers we have. So again, that's helpful just to double check and make sure we got all 35 values. And then if we scroll down, we're actually going to see what we call our 5-number summary. So we're going to see the minimum, Q1, median, Q3, and the maximum. So those 3 quartiles are actually given to us. Q1 is 71, Q2, which is also known as the median, is 78, and Q3 is 89. So instead of having to go through all of those steps of crossing off things, we could simply type that on our calculator and do that calculation. All right, last thing we're going to talk about before we actually draw our box and whisker plot is finding outliers. Now, we've talked about one of these ideas before of like finding an outlier, which is something that's significantly different from the rest of the data. However, it can be a little bit tricky because we're like, how different does it need to be? For example, is 43 far away enough to be considered an outlier, right? There was only one in the 40s, but is it different enough? So we actually have this calculation that we can do using our quartiles and our interquartile range. So these are going to be our steps. First, we're going to calculate the IQR. Remember that IQR stands for interquartile range. The way we find the interquartile range is we do our Q3 minus our Q1. So I'll go ahead and do that process with this example. So I'm going to take, we already found our quartile, so I'm going to do Q3 minus Q1. That's my first step. So I'm going to do 89 minus 71, and that's going to give me 18. So that's my IQR. Then we're going to multiply the IQR by 1.5. So my second step is we're going to take that IQR, which was 18, and we're going to multiply it by 1.5. And that's going to give me 27. Now, we're going to find an upper limit and a lower limit. To find our upper limit, we are going to add this value to Q3. And to find our lower limit, we're going to subtract this value from Q1. So, step 3, to find my upper limit, I'm going to take Q3, which we know up here was 89. So I'm going to take 89 and we're going to add that value that we just found. That's going to be 116. And to find my lower limit, I'm going to take my Q1, which was 71, and we're going to subtract that value, which will be 44. Now, this gives me my range. So 116 to 44. Anything outside of this range, anything higher than 116 or anything lower than 44 would be considered an outlier. So if I go back and look at my data, I don't have anything higher than 116, but this value of 43 is lower than my lower limit, which means that 43 is an outlier. So I know there's a few steps to that process, but if you can find your IQR, multiply it by 1.5, and then add and subtract to your quartiles to find those limits, then we're able to find if any values are outliers. All right, and lastly, our goal is to make a box and whisker plot. This is called a box plot, also sometimes called a box and whisker plot, because we have a box and we have two whiskers. This is going to be a graph of the 5-number summary. If you remember from the first part of this lesson, our 5-number summary included the minimum, the lower quartile, the median, the upper quartile, and the maximum. So we can see that all 5 of those numbers are represented on this graph. So we're going to go ahead and make a box plot for our test scores. Now, I'm given a number line here. I'm going to go ahead and put some values on this number line. I'm going to start with my minimum, and I know my minimum is 43 and my maximum is 98. So I want to make sure that I can fit 40 to 98 or 43 to 98 on my graph. So I'm going to go ahead and just go by tens. 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Perfect. So I'll just start with 40 down here. 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. So that way I know all my numbers will fit on this graph. Now, there's 5 numbers that we're going to graph. So I'm going to go ahead and graph my minimum, my quartile 1, my median, my quartile 3, and my maximum. And I'm going to kind of place a tick mark at each of those values. So our minimum was 43. So I'm going to go ahead and place a tick mark at 43. And again, it's just approximation. My lower quartile, or Q1, that was 71. So I'll go ahead and put a tick mark at 71. You'll notice I made this one a little bit longer since our box is a little bit bigger than the whiskers. I won't mark that off if they're the same length. That doesn't really matter. Then we'll do our median. So I'm going to put a tick mark at my median, or Q2, which was 78. And then our upper quartile, or our Q3, which was 89. And then our last tick mark will be our maximum, which we know was 98. So I'll go ahead and put a tick mark at 98. Now, the inner 3 tick marks are going to be connected as a box. So I'm going to go ahead and just connect these 3 longer tick marks to kind of make that box in the middle. Then we're going to extend our whiskers out from the box to our maximum and to our minimum. And that is our box plot. You can see our minimum, our Q1, our median, our Q3, and our maximum.